Oh,
Sounds good. Have a lovely weekend.
and have a good weekend. Yeah.
Okay. You, my friend, are hired permanently. um, can I tell you the dirty little secret of real estate? And I think you can have fun with it. Because when they say sure, it's okay, well, you're going to have to lean in because it's a secret. And you kind of lean in and you lower your voice. So they have to lean in. That was exactly, Bogdan's practicing the leaning in. It was excellent. Very well done. And the dirty little secret is, for all intents and purposes, marketing, like all the stuff that people think is so important, we just consider that foundational. We consider that just foundational exposure work. That's not why you're hiring a real estate agent. Because frankly, most of the stuff that we do, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and again, nobody wants you to know this, you can do yourself. You don't need me to hire a photographer. You don't need me to produce a brochure. Frankly, you don't even need me to get on the MLS. There are companies that do that for a flat fee. So all that stuff that we confuse ourselves around, that we think is our big value proposition, they can do that themselves, can't they? What you hire me for is all the rest. You're looking for someone who has the requisite skills to get you from the minute you have an offer on the table to the closing table. That's the hard part. That's what I specialize in. That's what I excel at. And I butchered that all up because I don't have it in front of me. And yet, I say it the way I give you at least the off the top of my head version of it, because I want to make sure that you believe that. Because I think sometimes people hear me say that and think, well, yeah, you know, that's Rick off in his little la la land again. And I get it, because I used to live in that la la land and bought into the fact of how important we were for all the wrong reasons. We're important for the stuff that we worked on Wednesday, right? And that was what Kim was underlining. Oh my goodness, Kim turned into a blue water bottle. Someone sent help to their house. Oh my goodness, there she is. Oh, okay, got it. Oh, I see, she's not paying attention, so she didn't want me to know that she wasn't paying attention. I understand now. There we go. Mike, make yourself comfortable, my friend. So really get clear about what value we provide. Right? That's not to say that we're not a path to exposure on the web. It's not to say that we're not a path to professional photography and marketing and all that stuff. I'm not saying that that's not important, and I'm not saying that we're not a path to all that. But if you build your value proposition around all that, you run the risk of just being out marketed or out exposed. If your big thing is marketing and somebody else has a bigger brochure or a fancier photographer or one more website that they tout that you're not on, right? You set yourself up for a loss then. I would rather us convince ourselves so that we can then convince people that all that stuff, it doesn't matter who you hire because we all do it the same. I get myself in trouble sometimes when I say what I'm about to say, and yet I don't really think that any of us do anything that's all that different from each other or from the other brands up and down the street. I think we all do about the same work. What sets us apart, I believe, is that when you can dive into what we spent time on Wednesday and really set yourself apart with the way you speak to people and the knowledge you bring about the market and about economics and how that functions to help them make decisions about their home, that's when you get hired. That's easily when people say, oh my goodness, She's totally the one. Because the other,
I'll
go ahead.
So it also allows you to frame the conversation on your own terms. You're absolutely taking control of that situation when you do that. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Right? Anybody ever go to a listing appointment and feel like the tide was turned and all of a sudden you were like on the opposite end of 20 questions? And sometimes we think that that's what a listing consultation is all about, is us being grilled about things that we do. If those are your listing consultations, guys, you've got to work with these scripts and flip that around, right? You're the question askers, not the question answerers. You've got to keep diving in and asking them more questions to make sure that they're understanding things at a high level. All right, any other ahas or questions about what we covered on Wednesday? Anybody have an opportunity to practice it in the last 48 hours? Okay, we'll take that as a whopping maybe. How's that? And then if you didn't, how will you spend time over the next 48 hours, and will you find time to practice it? Right, one of the things that we're looking at for next week, we're diving deeper into Zoom to see if we can do breakout rooms, because we think that our account has things called breakout rooms. And so what we're trying to set up is a session where we could all start like this, and then I can assign 4 of you each into a little breakout room so that you're Zooming just with those 4 people so you can practice and rehearse together and then come back, right? Because obviously this scenario with all of us is you can't really rehearse all that well. And yet if we could set up little breakout rooms, we could do some of those rehearsals one-on-one or in groups of 3 or 4, and then come back together and kind of download. So we are working on that for you. We're not 100% sure how to do it yet. So we're going to spend the weekend learning that and bring that to you next week. So do watch for that. And do find time with each other over the weekend or in downtime to really start practicing this. Because the only way you're going to start using it in front of clients is if you start using it not in front of clients. If the first time you decide to pedal down this path is with a commission with a seller that might produce a commission of $20,000, I guarantee you will pull back, and you will fall back on the way you normally do it instead of being brave enough to push forward on some of these.
I have to say one more thing about that specifically. If you don't say those words when you're by yourself, they won't come out of your mouth in front of a client, because there are some words that you will just go, say that. They have to have come out of your mouth 50 times before you say them in front of a client.
Yeah, it's 110% true, right? I think I can't remember if I told you this story or not, but when Debbie and I were still listening together, and we were shifting our presentation to more of a consultation, we would do the consultation alone, back and forth, just with each other, like to a chair, over and over and over and over again, and then get up and go to an appointment and do our old one, because the new one wasn't ready. We knew we hadn't done it enough, hadn't said the words enough, hadn't practiced it enough to really to go and put it on the road. And so we would practice all the new stuff, and then it was kind of fun, because then we would go to the old stuff, and pieces of the new stuff would flit on in. She'll tell you that I would purposely throw things in there just to keep everybody dancing, which is kind of true, because it's more fun that way, right? No safety net, just go. All right, so knowing that you now have a listing consultation under your belt, I wanted to spend our time today on what I sent out. I don't know when I sent it, the other day. If somebody's looking at the email, tell me when I sent it, in case people are looking for it. It's the Anatomy of a Seller Transaction.
You sent it on Wednesday.
I sent it on Wednesday. Thank you, Bogdan. So on Wednesday, I sent you that document. And here's how I'd like to use it, right? So for those of you who are new or newer to the industry, this is a checklist for you from the minute you get you find a buyer for a property till 30 days after the closing. And it's a valuable checklist to just kind of keep in any of your listing folders or your listing, what are those called? Binders. I know some people who have taken this and turned it into an Excel spreadsheet so they could actually do check marks with little boxes and whatnot as they go through. So use it as you need it. For those of you who are experienced on the call, I think it's important that we go through this again. And what I want you to use this for is kind of checkpoints to say, do I miss these steps? Am I coming at this from a position of A, objectivity, and B, being a stronger listing agent? So here's where I want to spend the next hour. I want to go through this document and really underline that to be a better listing agent, you need to be a more directive listing agent. When some of you have heard me say before that your clients are looking for you to be directive, right? And we're always modeling behavior. And so if the clients are looking for you to be directive, and directive means telling people what to do. That doesn't mean nastily telling people what to do. It doesn't mean annoyingly telling people what to do, right? And it doesn't mean making their decisions for them. And yet being directive, telling people what the next step is, that's why we get hired. If they knew all the steps and knew how to do it all, they wouldn't need us, right? And so being directive is one of those traits of a listing agent that I find is missing in so many people. And it's missing because we take the opposite stand of, I don't want people to think I'm pushy in any way, right? Or too aggressive. So therefore, I'll hang back. I'll let them make the decisions. I'll let them ask. So I'll say it one more time. If clients are looking for us to be directive, and we're behaving, because we're always modeling behavior, and we're behaving the opposite of being directive, do you see how all of a sudden now we're not showing the client the behavior that they actually want to hire? Yes, no, maybe so? Okay, good. So if you're experienced on this call, I want you to, as we go through this, don't look at that as, oh, well, I know this because I do this. What I want you to look at this as is, do I follow these steps, and do I do it from a place of being directive? Can I improve my own skills by being directive with the client, with the attorney, with the loan officer, with the other agent on the other side, right? Being directive is not just with one person or your client. Being directive really means embracing everybody in the transaction. Because remember, as a listing agent, your role is basically to do everybody else's job and your own, right? People oftentimes ask me, I don't know why everyone else doesn't seem to be pulling their own weight. I said, well, we have a name for that in real estate. It's called Tuesday. And oftentimes Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, right? You can't expect everyone to do the work that you expect them to do. You, as the listing agent, you just have to keep all the plates spinning. And we're going to talk about ways to do that, both directively and not annoyingly, right? So that's kind of the gist for the afternoon to get us into dinner time on a Friday. All right, so anatomy of a seller transaction. Let's run through this really quick because this top part talks a little bit about receiving the offer, right? And receiving the offer, obviously the first thing you're going to do is check all the documentation. There's a lot of you on this call and you're from different market centers. And so, so understand that depending on where you're doing business, That offer may come in on one of a number of different forms, right? It may come in on a standard offer to purchase form. It may come in on a standard purchase agreement, right? So for those of you who are kind of from northern Fairfield County, what you're used to is the offer to purchase. From lower Fairfield County, you're more used to the, and along the coast, you're used to the purchase agreement, the two-page purchase agreement. And for some of you who operate more in the east part of the county and or with REOs or short sales, you're used to the standard contract, the actual contract in the, it's found in the MLS, right? All are valid, and as a listing agent, your job is to receive it and just figure out what form it's written on and make sure it's filled out correctly. Plus, you have that list in front of you, all of the other stuff that comes with it. The only thing I want to touch on is mortgages versus cash, right? Mortgages, you want to make sure as the listing agent that you have an up-to-date document from someone you know. And I'm going to encourage you that if you don't know the person who signed the bottom of the letter, I'd make a call. I'd want to know who that person is. I'd want to ask a couple of questions about the buyers, right? So it's Joe Smith from 123 Lending. All right, well, let's make a phone call. Before we talk to the sellers, let's just make a phone call. Hey, Joe, it's Rick Scott with Keller Williams Realty. Your clients, Tom and Maria Smith, have made an offer on a property I represent at 123 Main Street. I'm curious, I have a letter in front of me that has your name at the bottom. I'm curious, can you just tell me, did you write it? I want to know if he remembers writing the document. Has anybody ever received a bogus pre-approval letter with an offer? I have. I can see a bunch of nodding heads, right? It happens. If someone has their email open, I'm going to pop this into the chat box. If you could, Cindy, I didn't bring my computer in, so if someone could forward that email from Wednesday to Cindy, just put her email in the chat box, that would be awesome.
Yeah, Rick, just so you know, I did not receive last week's script either. I had.
Okay, I can make sure I get you those after the fact, but if someone could shoot them over to Cindy, the Anatomy of a Seller transaction I sent on Wednesday, that would be awesome.
Thanks so much.
And so so make a call, find out if they wrote it, and then ask, and then see what other questions you might be able to get away with. Can you talk about their qualifications? Is there any reason you think they might not get the loan? You know, see what they might offer to you. Jacqueline, if you want to put your email in the chat box, I'm sure someone can send them to you as well. And then, of course, cash, you're going to ask for some kind of proof of funds, right? You need to have some documentation to show the sellers that they can actually afford it. What do you do if the proof of funds if the buyers are not interested in having proof of funds go to you?
Have them go to somebody else, to an attorney.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. You know, step in with the attorneys, have them send them to the attorneys. Maybe that's a safer arena for them, or they feel it's a safer arena. But don't just move forward to the sellers without some kind of documentation proving that these people have the money to buy the property, right? Every once in a while I hear people talk about, well, it was a cash offer, so there's no paperwork. That is untrue. That is false, right? If there's a cash offer, there's still some paperwork there, right? And then, of course, all the other disclosures. So number two, just note, this is just a reminder to everybody, a verbal phone call stating that someone is bringing you an offer is not an offer. I can remember, oh my goodness, there was a woman who, when I first started out, she had a buyer for every single thing I listed. Every single thing. I'd put a new listing on, she'd come in, she'd say, oh, is that your new listing? I have someone for that. She never sold a house, but she had buyers for everything, right? And it's those people who call you and say, well, could you do me a favor and just float this by your seller? Have conversations with your seller around this. Once you have the listing, it's part of the expectation setting conversation. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, sometimes we get phone calls from people who are kind of fishing. Do I have your permission when those kinds of fishing expeditions end up on my phone to let them know that you are more than willing and able to respond to anything that's in writing? Just get that from the seller. Have them nod their head on that and say, yeah, absolutely. Why, I don't want to waste my time. Because here's the thing, guys, without someone who's willing to put it in writing and sign their name to it, I'm not interested in wasting anybody's time, right? Floating an offer is different than writing an offer. I want buyers who are serious enough to put a pen on a piece of paper, right? So once you've received the offer, that's when you actually have it. Dual agency, just remember that the first step is to inform the seller, just as a review. The first step is to inform the seller that you've received an offer from someone inside of the company. Have a conversation around that dual or designated agency and have them consent to it in writing before you start having a conversation about the offer. As listing agents, you are the gatekeepers of dual and designated agency. And what that means is even if the buyer's agent forgets and sends you the documents with the dual or designated form, the offer documents, I'd like you to remember that we need to get consent before we negotiate. And so even if you receive the offer, you be the gatekeeper, as the listing agent, you get consent from the seller prior to having a conversation around the offer. Make sense? Excellent. Once you've verified all the paperwork's been received, call the seller and inform them of the receipt of the offer. If possible, arrange a time immediately to meet with them to present the offer in person. If that's not possible, ask if all decision makers can be on the phone to discuss over the phone, or just use Zoom, because now you're Zoom experts. I'm going to tell you what, if I were still a listing agent in the field today, there would not be an opportunity that I would not do face-to-face conversations about offers anymore. Because you are so much more powerful in person, which means being on the phone versus text or thumbs. Oh, that is text, thumbs or email, right? You're far more powerful, but you're even more powerful when people can actually put their eyeballs on you. So use that power of being in person and don't have these conversations that aren't either phone to phone or now face to face. And now phone to phone can be face to face if you use Zoom or Skype or one of those other opportunities. P.S. Don't send, if you get an offer at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and you've set up a time to meet with the sellers at 7 o'clock that evening, please don't just push forward on your email and send them all the documentation at 10 after 1, waiting around till a 7 o'clock meeting. Why is that a really bad idea?
Because they're going to have all their thoughts going through their head up until that time.
Exactly right. They're going to spend 6 hours churning and deciding that this is not worth it, and why are we even looking at this? Why are we even selling the house? Why did I ever marry you? All these things start to go through their head, right? And you're not there to assist in the interpretation of the documents, right? So set that schedule for 7 o'clock, and at 6:45, forward the documents so that within 10 or 15 minutes, you're on the phone having a conversation around them, right? I do like them to have a copy if possible, but send them just before so they have time to kind of gather them and then sit down with you. Don't send them hours ahead of time. That doesn't work so well. So review the offer with the seller. Number 5, I want you to underline something here that I know sounds ridiculous to talk about. and yet I cannot tell you how many times I hear it done differently. So number 5 says, review the offer with the seller. Do this in an upbeat and encouraging manner, no matter what the price or terms of the offer are. This is not the time for an editorial. And some of you decide, even if it's not verbally, your body language or the tone of your voice delivers this, like, you know, wah, wah, this Eeyore version of the offer. It's no wonder they're not excited that they got an offer, because you started the whole conversation by saying, hey, it's Rick. I wish I had some better news for you. You know, maybe, are you sitting down? Remember, I didn't write this. I'm just, don't shoot the messenger. Oh, if I never hear the phrase, don't shoot the messenger again in my entire life, I will be so okay with that. Right? And so I make the point when we go through this to make sure that what you're hearing is, remember, you're always modeling behavior and you're modeling it for other people. And so if you're modeling excitement around the fact that we have an offer, regardless of what the numbers are, if you're excited that we got an offer, well, then they're more likely to be excited that we got an offer. And when they come from a place of excitement, they answer the questions differently. And so your job is to continue to help them be excited and inspired by the fact that someone liked their house well enough to pick up a pen, sign an offer, and write a check. Right? This whole idea of, oh, I'm so insulted. You got to help people get over that, because that is just nonsense. It doesn't matter.
And agents.
Right? Yeah, indeed. It's not just clients, right? So the way you present the offer has as much to do with their willingness to play ball with someone as the terms of the offer. I wholeheartedly believe that. When you're good at presenting it in such a way that you're upbeat and excited and you can help them understand the offer, even if it's a crappy offer, they're at least willing to play ball. They may not be doing cartwheels in the street when they hear the rest of the terms, and yet they don't have to be doing cartwheels in the street. All they have to do is be willing to play ball, right? So that's a really important one at number 5. And again, I know it sounds like a duh conversation, and yet I can't tell you how many, when I overhear people talking with clients and presenting offers, that doesn't sound upbeat and encouraging to me, right? So really work hard on that. I would almost think beforehand, how am I going to pump this sucker up?
You're also setting the tone for the long and dusty road that is ahead, which includes everything. And it's so important not to have that weight around your neck of setting the tone that somebody's less worthy or being a jerk or something that has no relevance to the process.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's a really good point, Debbie. That sometimes we don't even realize we're setting ourselves up for failure, because we start to have conversations with the seller around this particular buyer, and we start to horribilize the buyer. Well, if we horribilize the buyer, you know that verb, horribilize? It's to make horrible, right? We horribilize the buyer, and what do we expect the seller to do? They're going to follow our lead. And so now the buyer is the enemy, because they didn't start high enough, or they want to close longer or faster, or they don't want to put 20% down, or whatever those terms are, right?
Yeah.
So be really, really cautious around that. I would encourage you, if you're on the phone with someone, don't have these conversations sitting down. You have far more energy when you are standing up. If you're on Zoom, stand up anyway, right? Figure it out. Talk to the computer this way.
And Rick, this is
a whole bunch of energy. Go ahead.
Sorry. This is on sellers too, but I find that is exactly the same, and even almost more so for buyer's agents, if you are a buyer's agent and you're talking to the listing agent, and them to convey that to their sellers. If you say like, well, you know, I know my offer is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you present it to them like, hey, listen, my buyer is this and that, and, you know, they're great. And, you know, this is a great offer. And I really think that you should, you know, present it like a freaking birthday cake to the seller. They do it that way. Really, they do, you know?
Yeah.
So same thing for the other side.
No, it's 100%, right? Again, we're always modeling behavior, right? And so what behavior do you want the other person to see and feel from how you're delivering the conversation? So let's just dive into number 6. I'm going to read it to you as I would personally present it, and I want you to listen to it and just make some notes, underline it if you have it printed. What are the things that you like about it? What are the things you notice about it? Are there things you don't like about it, right? Just listen to the dialogue, and let's talk about it afterwards. Who am I presenting this to? I'm going to present it to Chris. So Chris, the offer that we have on the table is from Tom and Sally Smith from Pennsylvania. They have 2 kids and another one on the way. They will both be working down in White Plains once they make their move, and they are opening negotiations on your home with an offer of $550,000. They will look to finance 80% of that with an amount, 80% of that amount with a mortgage, and we have a letter of pre-qualification from Fairfield County Bank for that amount. Their ability to obtain the mortgage will be a contingency in the contract. The other 20% will be in cash. 10% total put down at the contract signing, and the other 10% cash brought to the closing table. They've asked for the following extra items to be included in the sale. They'd like the pool equipment, the lower level freezer, and the play set in the backyard. Their contract will be contingent upon satisfactory inspections of the house and septic systems, which will also include testing the well water, as well as testing for radon in both the air and the water. They're asking for 7 days to get those inspections completed. They'd like to have contracts signed and back to you within 14 days and have requested a June 30th closing date. So let's discuss this. You know, what are your thoughts? I mean, do you have any questions around the offer, and what are you thinking? So that's the presentation. I realized I actually didn't need you, sorry.
You want me to say something?
No,
Okay.
I thought I needed you to chime in, and I realized that I didn't. But you listened brilliantly. I mean, everyone, right? Did Chris not do that brilliant job listening to that?
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that. What did you hear in that? What are the pieces that jump out at you?
Rick, this is Neil. What I really liked was the first negotiating offer part. Opening, you know, because that way you're telling the seller that the next move is a counter, not, oh, throw this thing out, it's no good.
Yeah, so true, right? We specifically say they're opening negotiations with $550,000. And a lot of times I hear people say the offer is $550,000. That seems so final. It seems so permanent. It seems like, so instead we wrap that in. We're going to open negotiations at $550,000 because you're here and they're there, and now the job of finding a middle ground is where we go next. I think Dee and then Mike and Kim.
I like that you present a little bit of a story about the buyer to make them real and not just, you know, a name and that's it. It really starts to bridge a gap of some conversation and makes them real people.
100%.
And I just think that's so important, and this is just always, it just seems to be left out a lot.
And you know, Dee makes a really good point, because for those of you who were in the DISC class the other day, right, we talked about the percentages of D's, I's, S's, and C's, right? Who are you most likely to be dealing with? What
Eyes.
So the I's and the S's kind of have the top tier there, right? Mostly you're 65% of the time you're talking to an I or an S. I's and S's are people, right? They're relationship based. And so 2/3 of the time you're talking to someone where people matter. And so now that's not everybody, right? And yet 2 out of 3 times you're speaking to a seller who it's important to them to know something about the people, right? And so humanizing people helps 2 out of 3 times.
Can I add one thing to that?
Of course.
Many times, like I remember when my late mother-in-law was selling her house, it came down to a letter that was presented with the offer. Now, and it's a while back and all that, but the point was it humanized it for her, and the offers were exactly the same, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for her, and she loved the house so much, that's who she wanted then to have the house.
Yeah.
So it's that connection. And right now we all are looking for connection. So it makes it it drives it home even more.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about bringing it to today, right? People who feel connected to other people, they win no matter what, right? But they're $100,000 less. I don't care. They're not on Zoom. I love them, right? So yeah, finding that connection. And when we go through our buyer unit, we're going to talk about this on the other side. And as the buyer's agent, really presenting your clients in the best light by writing all these things, giving the listing agent the tools that the listing agent needs to humanize your buyers for them. Because as Dee said, sometimes that's all that it takes to set those people apart and have them win, regardless of the numbers sometimes. Go ahead, Trombus.
So what we usually tell our sellers ahead of time early on is, don't worry about the price. Our job is to bring somebody to the table, get them emotionally attached enough to put pen to paper. The rest, we could work with that. If they're willing to put pen to paper, they're emotionally attached. So early on, don't worry about the price. That's irrelevant. We could work with that. And nine times out of 10, we could get them right where we need them to be. And so we sort of preempt that and give them the expectations that, typically they're going to test the waters.
Yeah,
and
of course.
It worked out well.
Yeah, it's so from an expectation setting conversation, are you having that kind of an expectation setting conversation? Because when they expect, if you don't set expectations with sellers ahead of time, they expect it's on the market for $600,000. And so what they expect is someone to come in and overpay for, let's make an offer. We're going to start at $610 on your $600,000 list price. In the seller's head, that's what they're expecting. And when you reset that expectation, and now you have them expecting that there's going to be some gap. That's just the way this works, right? It's just the nature of our beast. What else? Anything else that you noticed? Like, didn't like?
Rick?
Yeah.
What I really liked about this was that besides presenting it in a very upbeat way, it was a very professional way. You used language that, even though it's written on the offer, to actually say contract, negotiation, inspection, a pre-approval, mortgage, things like that, that a lot of agents just say, here, they're going to put 20% down and they want to close on such and such a day. And you're spelling everything out, and it sounds like you're so knowledgeable about the entire process.
Yeah, 100%, Cindy. And that is the purpose of why this is more of a narrative than it is bullet points, right? A lot of agents give bullet points. Price, mortgage, closing date. Has nothing to do with who they are. It has nothing to do with the process. And so this purposefully spells out the process, right? I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that everyone knows the process. Right? Most people sell houses once every 7 to 10 years. We do it every day, but they do it once every 7 to 10 years. And so I would challenge you, think of something that you do only once every 7 to 10 years and challenge yourself to remember all the steps the first time out, right? And so when we're having this conversation, we're reminding them of all those steps. It wraps them in some bubble wrap and makes them feel like they understand the whole offer inside and out. And I think when they understand the whole offer inside and out, there are fewer questions in their head. They're more attracted to the buyer. when there's questions in their head, they take that out on the offer, right? And so we want to make sure that they're thinking very clearly, so we're going to outline everything for them. Love that. Anything else before we cruise forward? There's one more thing that I want to just make sure that you catch.
So Rick, there were two things that this is Donna. In the beginning, when you're telling them a little bit about the family to humanize them, I like the fact that it also limits how much you're telling about the other side, because there's certain things that are confidential and none of their business. So the fact that they are both will be working in White Plains, or that they have, you don't have to go into their titles and how much they make, and all of that is maybe for another day or not at all any of their business at this point. So I like the fact that it touches on it, but it doesn't give away too much. The other thing about the process and all the steps and clearly laying it out is that, I always remind my people that these are, it's not just the price, it's the terms and the conditions here. And so all of these are negotiable items that we need to discuss. So you can isolate them when you go to say, so other than everything, other than the price, is everything else okay? Because often the closing date is something that we need to talk about, because it doesn't work for one side or the other.
Yeah, closing day is one of those. So it's I like what Donna said. They're separately negotiable, right? It's not one big package. It's not all or nothing, right? Let's break this apart. What works, what doesn't work, right? Where would you like to see some improvement? Maybe the price is just fine, but there's no way we can be out that quickly, or there's no way we can wait that long, right? And so what's cool about closing date is that closing date is one of those things that sometimes we ask people to pay for the closing date that they're looking for, right? And that's another tool that we can use to balance the conversation out. Yeah, absolutely. The one last thing I want to point out before we move forward is the fact that this is not a cash offer, right? Because we talked about the financing. And yet what I want you to always utilize in conversation with sellers, because you see how this is written. They're going to be financing 80% of that, and the other 20% will be in cash. I want you to be saying the word cash, right? So if they're financing 80%, well, the other 20% is in cash. I mean, the reality is it's all in cash at the closing table, right? But the idea of talking about the other 10% and the next 10% for that 20% down, people like the word cash. For whatever reason, they're kind of focused on. Did you ever have somebody accept a cash offer for less money than an offer that was contingent on a mortgage? Right? Sometimes that's a good idea, and sometimes it's less of a good idea, and yet people are drawn to that cash idea. And so what I want to do is make sure that we're talking about a property that's going to be financed, and yet there's a part of it that's coming to you in cash, baby. Because when you say cash, here's what they think about. They think about the buyer kind of pulling in this bucket of money and popping it on the table. And that's what they like to think about. So use that term, even if it's not a cash offer, there's still cash being brought to the table. I find it is an exciting, relaxing term that sellers like to hear. Not to confuse them that it's a total cash offer, but anything that we can do to kind of ease their stress in working this through, and the word cash seems to do that for a lot of people. All right, so let's cruise through the next couple of lines quickly. Number 7, be certain that you've examined every line of the offer. You want to point out items such as contract language, right? Sometimes we receive documents that if they sign it, it states as a contract unless it's replaced by an attorney, right? Sometimes we get offers to purchase that are proprietary from other companies, and some of those offers to purchase have squeezed in the middle of it in small print that when everybody signs it, even though it says offer to purchase on it, that when everyone signs it, it's a contract. So you need, as the listing agent, you need to just go through that and make sure that any of that language is clear and that you point it out to them. That's not to say it's bad language, right? Sometimes that's very helpful for a seller, and yet they can't make the decision as to whether or not it's useful or not unless they know it's there and what it means, right? So just know that you need to go through and point that kind of language out. They may want to get advice from their attorney before they sign a document that ends up being a contract, right? Just know what it says and be able to explain what it says to them. Number 8, work with the seller such that they fully understand the offer that's being presented. Answer any questions, counsel them on next steps. If the offer is acceptable, they may accept. If it's not acceptable, here's something that I gotta take a really firm stand on. When a seller receives an offer, no counter is not one of the options. It's not one of the options, not when you work with me as a listing agent. Sorry. Your options are you accept what's been given or you modify it. The flat out reject, that is normally part of ARM, right? Accept, reject, modify. On the list side, that doesn't exist when you hire me, because it doesn't do any seller any good. It is the verbal equivalent of a temper tantrum, right? And so we want to help guide them away from, you know, if I throw Rudy the ball, Rudy and I go out to play catch, right, in the backyard, and I throw Rudy the ball, and Rudy catches the ball, looks at it, turns around and goes home. Well, now we're not having a catch anymore, right? He took the ball and he went home. That's what happens when your sellers decide not to counter. And so you have to get better and better and better at helping them understand why that is not in their best interest, right? Mike started down that path before with setting those expectations that numbers might come in anywhere. What's not relevant is where we start. What is relevant is where we end up, right? People will start all over the place. We're here to assist you in bringing the number to a place that is A, reasonable, and B, acceptable to you. And so there's a couple of things I'd like to just point out here is, even if they're looking to make a point, I'd rather them take $1,000 off the list price and throw something back. Make the point with a smaller counter than no counter, because no counter sends the message. Remember, we're always modeling behavior. Have I said that 106 times yet so far, right? And if we're always modeling behavior, that means our sellers are always modeling behavior. And so if they decide to not counter, they're now modeling the behavior of being inflexible sellers. And what they think they're sending the message to the buyers of is, you know, this is not where we need to be. You need to do something different here. And instead they're sending the message, we're inflexible, we're not really negotiable, therefore maybe you should find a different house. That's the message they really send, regardless of the words that are used. And so I think helping sellers understand that by maybe just explaining just that, right, is a real help to help them move forward. The other thing the other path that I think is very powerful is the idea of the what if, right? Help them with a what if exercise. And here's what I mean by that. So, so Chris, just unmute a second. So we go through, I present Chris this whole offer. The offer is $550,000, right? His property's on the market for $650,000. And the first thing he says to me is, I'm not countering. And so the exercise we might go through is, you know, because I completely understand that. Let me ask you a couple of questions if I could. Pretend for a second that this offer did not come in at $550,000. Right, we're just going to put on our what if hat for a second. What if this offer had come in at $600,000? What's the counter that you would offer someone who made an offer to you at $600,000?
I would probably counter at 640.
So 640. Got it. And so I'm curious, Chris, is there a reason why that same counter couldn't be used for these particular folks who just chose to start their negotiations a little lower?
No, I mean, I'm just upset. It was crazy low to begin with, but
Well, and recognizing that it's not really where we start, it's where we end up, right?
agreed.
So would you be okay offering that same counter to these folks, even though they started a little lower?
Yeah, I want to get the job done.
Excellent. Let's go do that. Right. And so we just have this little exercise that we do where we just move the offer rate. Let's pretend it's something else. Because the reality is Chris wants to sell his house. And then he leaves it to me to go back and do my job. Right. And so Dee's on the other side of this. Now I get to go back to Dee and say, so Dee, I was able to kind of wrestle a $10,000 counter from the seller. However, in order to continue this conversation, we are going to need to see kind of a move into the realm of the reasonable, right? And so it would be awesome if we could move into a place that started with a 6 or as best you can, right? I know how talented you are, and I know that you'll get the job done, so let me know, right? And so I'm delivering that now to the other side, and now Dee goes and does her job. But encourage people to not counter. It is just not conducive to a transaction, right? It's actually the anti-transaction. You want to keep people saying yes. And I love the idea of helping them with a what-if conversation to help them realize that they have nothing to lose by throwing the ball back. And many of you on this call, I am certain, have done something just like that, only to have the buyers come back and now all of a sudden they're at 615 or something ridiculous, right? They take this huge leap because the only thing they were just testing the waters. They were just seeing what the story was. And when the message comes back that the counter is 640, they get to say, okay, well, I guess we're not stealing this one. We may have to actually pay market value. Okay, let's get real because we don't want to lose it, right? Anybody ever have a seller say, I am so offended. I am so offended. Right? Are we all clear about how ridiculous that comment is? Right? Because there is no reason to be offended. And depending on how well you know your seller client, I love the script of, Kim, it is, I understand the emotional side of it. One of the things that we talked about when you hired me, however, is that it's my job to kind of keep you focused on making good business decisions. Do you remember that conversation? Yeah, excellent. And so this is me sort of waving the flag a little bit, saying you may be veering into emotion instead of staying clear on that business track. Because do you agree that being offended by the one person out of the 39 showings that we've had, the one person who decided to stop, love your house enough and sit down and write an offer, to be offended by that one person is a little bit crazy.
Right. I'm crazy.
Right? Let's do this. Let's be offended by the other 38 people that didn't stop and put an offer on your house, and let's choose to embrace this one, right? Or whatever, right? So the idea is to help them understand that this isn't a personal attack, right? This is not about, it's not about how you feel. Now remember, 2 out of 3 times you're dealing with I's and S's, and I's and S's tend to lead with their feelings. They're not task-oriented people. They are relationship people, right? And so they tend to lead with their feelings. So you have to help people, you have to help guide people, not by making them wrong, but by just reminding them, you're right, you hired me to keep us focused on the business conversation. And so I'm going to just kind of keep us focused on the business conversation. Yes? All right. We already talked about number 9. Number 10, once the offer is negotiated and acceptable to both parties, ask the agent for the buyer to rewrite the offer or resend it, right? Get the seller's signature and send a copy back. At that time, you're going to ask the agent for the buyer a couple of things: who the attorney is, who the inspector is, who the septic inspector is, right? You just want to get an idea of what's going on with the offer. Hopefully, they've been thinking about who those people are. I always wanted to know who those people are because there were some people, I don't know if he's still in business and if you still ban him, Debbie, but I can remember when Debbie and I were still listing together, there was an inspector, a local inspector, that he was banned from inspecting our listings. And we had those conversations with the seller up front to say, just recognize that if this person shows up with your buyers, we are advising you to be very strong back to those buyers to say, if you want to purchase this house, you'll need to hire someone else. And be okay if they say, nope, it's this or nothing. Okay, well then go buy a different house. Because here's the thing, you're not actually risking anything. Because if you let that person inspect your home, these buyers won't buy your house anyway. He was horrible. Is he still in business? Does anyone know?
I don't believe
so.
so.
I
And
don't
Dee,
think so.
Dee knows him too, because
Yeah,
she had
I banned him
similar.
off.
Who is it?
Yeah, no,
Who was
What was
it?
his name? I don't even remember.
Blocking it.
I'll think of it, but
Me
there
too.
was a very specific thing that he did, which was he looked at a piece of wood, he saw black on the wood, and he said to the buyer, this house has black mold in it. You
Mhm.
can't do that. The only way you know that is if it is tested for mold.
Mhm.
And that sent the buyers away from our $1 million listing. And we never sold that house.
No.
So
Nope.
no more.
I had that happen too with an inspector from a pretty big company that I use all the time still. There was just a woman inspector that, she tried to open the windows in a place and she said, oh, they're stuck. I mean, there's something wrong with these windows. All the windows have to be changed. I'm like, do you think that maybe you can just, it's closed shut because it's painted shut. Maybe you could just take a razor and go around it and they'd open. No. And she also said the septic was going to be shot because there was a willow tree that was right near the septic, and certainly the roots were growing into the septic system. And I'm like, are you freaking crazy? These are first-time buyers. Don't say that to them, are you? But she's no longer with that company, thank God. And
Jed Walker.
That's who it was. Yeah.
Jed Walker.
Thank you. He took down 3 deals for me.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah, and so again, it got to the point where we were like, and people oftentimes ask me about, can you do that? Can you
Yes.
ban somebody? And
Yes.
the answer is you can have a conversation with a seller
Yes.
who can make a determination about who they will allow in their home. And so we just started to do that, and it was interesting when because at least once or twice after we banned him, someone chose him, and we got to have that conversation with the buyer's agent. Both times they chose somebody else because you know what? It wasn't that important for them to have Jed Walker come into their house. It was more important to them to buy the house. And so they just chose somebody else. But just remember that's all about advocacy. And if there's someone in the marketplace that continually shows that they are just not good for your clients, have a conversation and see what you can do about that. It's kind of like the back in the shift. Many of you who were around 10 or 12 years ago remember some of these conversations, and that was as listing agents requiring buyers to also get approved through one of our own in-house people, or at least someone we knew and trusted. Right? If it wasn't in-house. And people oftentimes push back on that concept of saying, well, you don't have the authority to tell people who they can use for a mortgage. No, well, we have a conversation with our sellers, and we can certainly advise the sellers to have a secondary pinch hitter ready to go because back in 2008, 2009, 2010, you know, people were being denied all the time based on all the new lending criteria. And so when something came forward from someone we didn't have any relationship with, our job as listing agents was to make sure that there was a safety net. And so we would talk to the sellers, and the sellers would issue an agreement. And so we got to go back to buyer's agents and say, so here's the thing, we don't know this person, which means the seller doesn't know this person, and the seller is not comfortable accepting this pre-approval letter. And so what we'd like to do, that the buyer can choose whomever they want to write the mortgage. However, we'd like for them to go and get approved by people that we know, so that we can confirm with the seller that there's a safety net there just in case something goes sideways on this other one. And did that sometimes cost sellers a potential buyer? Very rarely, and yet sometimes people decided to react emotionally to that. How dare they? Who do they think they are? Well, they're just trying to protect their interests, right? And again, so recognize that you always have the opportunity to come at this job from two different angles. You can come at it objectively and neutrally, or you can come at it full of emotion, right? Being a listing agent especially, the more neutral you can be and the more objective you can help people communicate, and the more objective you yourself can communicate, the better off you are. When you get sucked into that emotion and you take things personally, and you again, sometimes you take things personally, then you take it back to the seller, and the seller doesn't have any idea why you're emotional or upset. They just know it came from the other side, and so they just glom onto your emotions and say, well, the other side must be horrible. Look what it's doing to poor Kimberly. She's so upset. Those people must be awful. And then they start to treat the other side as if they're awful, when it had nothing to do with that. It was Kimberly reacting emotionally to something the buyer's agent said to her or something, right? So emotions, who needs them? Just pack them in a box and put them in the garage, right? All righty. 13, make sure your paperwork goes into the MCA within 3 business days. 14, once the inspection dates are set. Okay, so this is kind of a dumb thing, I know, but once the inspection dates are set, as well as the appraisal, please make sure that you have a system to communicate that to your sellers. There's a reason it's there. And it's there because I screwed that up. Both times, as a matter of fact. It wasn't the same seller, but I forgot to tell the seller about an inspection one time, and I forgot to tell the seller about an appraiser one time. That only has to happen to you once until you create a better system, right? But I got a phone call from a seller one time saying, "Hi, it's Maria. Hi, what's going on?" She said, "Well, I'm in my nightgown in the kitchen feeding my 3 children, and there's a posse of people on my front porch telling me that they have an appointment to come and spend time in the house." Oops.
I have 2 words: command checklists. Build your opportunities with your command checklists.
Yeah, that saves that, right? So again, I know some of these things sound like duh, and yet they're there because many of you are newer to the process. Those of you who are not newer to the process, you're newer to growing volume, right? And so when you're headed into a volume business and you're continuing to grow, these are all those things that I will tell you that didn't happen to me in my first 6 months in the business. That happened to me after I was in the business for a while, because things started to grow. All of a sudden, there was so much more on my plate because the business was growing. Some of these smaller details started to fall apart and become holes in my business, right? And so that's where systems really need to step in to make sure that you don't have Maria in her nightgown at 8:30 in the morning, feeding her 3 children, calling, asking why there's 7 people on the front porch, right? Here's the good news. She said, "Give me a half hour and I will make this work." And so I called the other agent and said, okay, start outside. She needs about 25 minutes, and then knock on the door again. And in 25 minutes, she was out, right? So we made it work. And yet that made me feel like an idiot, right? Because I was an idiot, which is why I felt that way. You know, I dropped the ball and not how I wanted to be running the business. Of course, you have to report your property as shown within 48 hours as the listing agent. You don't necessarily go to the inspections as the listing agent. I advise against that. Even when your seller says, no, I want you to be there. I totally want you to be there. What do you say when a seller says, no, I want you to be there?
It's not in your best interest for me to be there, because if they find any disclosable facts, then I'm legally bound and obligated as a realtor to disclose those facts.
I like that, April. Hope you all wrote that down, right? Not in your best interest, right? Because once I know it, I can't unknow it, right? You all recognize that, right? You can't unring the bell. Excellent. Love that. Love that. Love that. Love that.
I was actually, can I just add something to that really quick,
Yeah,
Rick?
of course.
Because I know that we talked and mentioned the other day about like going to the town hall and doing your due diligence. And I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, but when I took my law class to get my broker's license, Larry Riefberg had Gene Marconi come in, and he was the head counselor for Carr at the time. And he actually advised that we do not go to the town hall as a listing agent or a buyer's agent, because you put the liability on yourself in case you forget to pull a building department file or a health department file. So he did not advise that like we go and accompany them, but he was really, he really kind of drove home that it opens a can of worms for us if we happen to miss something when we go.
Sure. And so I would say that the first thing I'll say is that I love Gene Marconi. And I don't always agree with Gene Marconi. And Gene knows I don't always agree with Gene Marconi, because Gene and I have gone the round robin on a couple of issues. Interestingly enough, one just last weekend, because Gene Marconi, of course, is now the general counsel for Berkshire Hathaway, right? And so he and I had to kind of go a round or two with our disclosure documents. And so I agree with that on the buyer side wholeheartedly, right? However, what I slightly disagree with, and it depends on what we're talking about. So on the buyer side, I agree with it, because if the buyers say, hey, April, could you go to the town hall and get me all the information I need on to put a pool in? Well, that does create a lot of liability for you, because like, what do you need? What if you miss something? What if, right? And so I mean, I'm happy to go with you. I'm happy to put you in contact via phone with somebody. I'm happy to go and pick up documents for you for our meeting, if in fact they're left for you after you've had the conversation. So I could not agree more, certainly on the buyer side. On the listing side, I agree slightly less, because there are things that you as the listing agent need to know about the property, because you're the one, the listing brokerage via the listing agent, you're the one who's making representations on the MLS, right? And what we've learned the hard way, usually once or maybe twice a year, is that when listing agents make the wrong representations because they haven't done their work, that comes back to bite us. And I would err on the side of, I see more issues where listing agents have not done enough work to get the right information and the facts to come back to bite us, than we went and we got either the wrong information or incomplete information. So I think with a valid checklist, which I think we provided you at the risk reduction class, right? We can also provide again on Monday, with the right checklist to make sure you're getting everything you need with checks in the boxes. I think there's less a concern on the list side. And yet, again, I see his point. I think it's less valid on the list side than it is on the buy side. Just my opinion.
Rick, I have to support you with 20,000 times over on the list side.
Yeah, because there's stuff we need to know, right?
So many, so many.
Yeah. And the problem is that if you leave it to the seller to go and get that information, you're still liable. We're still liable because we're the ones putting it on the MLS, right? So it's really incumbent upon us, as we know what we need to do to put everything in the MLS, to verify all that information, and some of that information is found at Town Hall.
And finding things that even in the last 2 years that have closed, that things that need to be worked on immediately in order to be able to move forward.
Yeah, 100%.
Give it to the seller to then work on.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, just get ahead of the game a little bit with some of those issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah, indeed, right. And I think that the idea of involving the client, right? Because if it's just you going to Town Hall and doing the work, then I see Jean's point more clearly. If it's you going with your checklist, knowing that these are all the things that we need to uncover, bringing that work back to the table and having a conversation with the seller around what you've discovered, and then getting the seller's input on what it looks like about liens and about whatever else might be discoverable at Town Hall.
Permits, whatever.
Yeah, exactly, permits and things like that. Then you're involving the client, and because they have a disclosure issue, it's our issue to make sure the information's right on the MLS. So it is a balancing act. It is a balancing act.
But even about, I'm sorry, Chris, Rick, even about permits and that kind of thing. I mean, it really, you have to go and check out about, or at least ask your seller clients and say, like, do you know if you have any open permits? That's up to them to go and check out, because I mean, we can't know all of that. And if it comes up at the end, it's kind of, you're screwed, because you really need to know that, close them or whatever you need to do, whatever your permits.
Yeah,
before you get on the market, if you can, and if not, do it while you're on the market, because so that by the time you're closed, they're closed, and you don't want to have that. Oh my God! Hey, we have an open permit.
Well,
yeah, that's a great surprise
thing.
at the end, especially now.
Here's the thing: if you leave it in the hands of the seller,
they're not going to do anything.
It doesn't get done, right? That's just real. I can't remember if it was someone on this call or not. I just had a conversation with somebody. Oh, it was. Where's Kim? Wasn't it you? Yeah.
It was me.
Right.
Yeah.
We just had this conversation the other day of where Kim was in a situation where she had a proactive conversation with the seller who was going to get something done, who then didn't get it done. Right. And as time was getting shorter and shorter, now Kim had to step back in and try and fix the issue, because the seller said, yes, I will do it, and then didn't get it done. So it is one of those games you play where we need to know the information up front, and then we need to, if the seller has to do something themselves, we have to sit on top of them to make sure it's getting done in a
but you know what? They may not even know that it has to be done. Like, I have somebody who has a bathroom in their basement that they wanted to start, and they had an open permit. And so the question is really just, you know what? I think the best question to ask your sellers, is there anything that, will hold up, that you know of, any open permits, anything that will hold up this transaction in the end? And I asked that question just now of one of my sellers, and they said, oh yeah, I think, we would open up a permit for a bathroom in the basement. We never really did it. So it's kind of maybe open, but I don't know what's happening, and it is open still. So you have to get that closed before we even decide to, get on the market, because
here's the other thing I will
on it is what I mean.
Here's the other thing I'll bring to your attention. If you're doing a two-step, right, and you've gone and seen the property, and now you're doing your homework and having the seller come in for the consultation, if you will go to town hall and check those things out, right? Again, part of the checklist. What are the liens? What are the permit issues? Are there maps? And you get all that stuff beforehand, and you have all of their stuff in front of you when they come in for the consultation. Guess what? You've now made a wow impression, because you've gone above and beyond to have all this documentation about their home sitting in front of them. Right? I will remember till my dying day, I lost a listing I really wanted to Russ Newman. And when I asked asked the question, as I always did, I'm curious, why did you choose Russ over me? One of the things that these people said was, when he came to the house, he had a stack of paperwork from town hall outlining all the different functions of our house and the closed permits and whatnot. And it was so complete and so professional. I thought, you know what, I will never not do that again. Because it annoyed, if that was really the reason, that was a winnable listing for me had I just done the work up front, right? And then now that you have it, you get to have a conversation around it. I'm curious about this lien, right?
But it's sometimes not even about doing the work yourself. It's about just asking them the question. Is there anything that's illegal in your house that, like, I need to know about, that you might think that, that you've done that might be, it might put you in jail, is what I tell them to, like, have fun.
But they
and
may
say, like,
not
do you have anything any work that you've started that maybe, might not be kosher with the,
and you can have a whole lot of fun. You can have a whole lot of fun having all that documentation beforehand, asking those questions. And when they say no, you say, aha, well, what about this? What do you say to that? No,
I have one reminder, Stonecrest, that's all I'm going to say. So there you go.
God help us all on that one, right?
Nothing. She knew nothing.
Yeah. And whether they really know nothing, or it's like selective amnesia, right? In that case, certainly she knew nothing. And yet I know I have had circumstances myself where it was definitely selective amnesia, because they didn't want to have to deal with it. So they thought if they answered no, that we would just forget it, right? So doing the work is important to make sure that we have clean closings. Alrighty, so let's cruise through. I know we only have 9 minutes, and yet we can get through almost all the rest of this. So 17, this becomes that point in time, right? The inspections are done. You've dropped in maybe and checked in on the inspection. All the inspections are done, and you start to get into a place of your job is to keep all the plates spinning, right? You've got to keep all the parties in action. And so if it were me, I would set a schedule, right? At least once or twice a week, you need to be in contact with the sellers, perhaps the seller's attorney, the buyer's agent, to make sure that everything's moving on that end. And just set yourself a schedule and check those boxes every time you make those calls and those communications. It does not have to be annoying, even though you're making lots of calls. It can just simply be, hey, Bogdan, it's Rick Scott. I just wanted to check in and see how things were going with the buyers on 123 Main Street. Is there anything I can do to assist? Right? Offer some help. And if the answer is no, I think everything's going great, excellent, I'll check in a couple of days. Right? If you can keep those plates spinning, sometimes just you making a phone call to one of those parties puts them in action on something that they had forgotten about or that they hadn't done yet. Right? You're not necessarily calling specifically to ask, did you fix the septic? Or your listing agent, did you? Is the mortgage clear to close? But just that reminder that it's you reminds the buyer's agent or whomever you're calling to get into action around that file. Go ahead, Kimberly.
And what I do if I can't call, I send an email to everyone on my team on that side, the seller's attorney, the lender, and if it's an inspector, if we haven't done that out, just say, hey guys, Monday morning update, everything going along as planned. Our next steps are, if this is in question, please respond to all. That way I'm not the one delivering the news from the lender that, she needs these documents, because then your client's gonna say, okay, what documents are those? I don't know.
Yeah,
so
right.
let the lender say, hey, XYZ, we need this, that, and the other. you know, and then that way it's all in writing, and while you're managing the process, but you're not speaking for the attorney, you're not speaking for the lender.
I love the idea of like Monday morning update. I think that's a really smart path, right? So for every single pending you have, every Monday morning, you're going to just touch base with all the players to make sure those plates are still spinning, right? There will be transactions where it will take more than one communication in a week, and yet some transactions, a Monday morning check-in is all everybody needs to keep all that going. So from a systems perspective, you should write that down because I love that. The other thing I didn't mention earlier that I want to just mention now quickly is the idea of setting clear time expectations with everybody that you speak to, right? As the listing agent, again, you're kind of the keeper of the clock. And so you know, if Bogdan's bringing me an offer and we need to know when the inspections are going to be, I'm going to start asking those questions. I'm curious, Bogdan, when can I expect to hear back from you on the inspections? And then he'll give me you know, we should know by first thing tomorrow morning. Excellent. Is it okay if I don't hear from you to give you a shout? Right? And I'm going to hold him to first thing tomorrow morning. So if I get into the office at 9 o'clock and I still have no inspections for the property that he sold, I'm going to make that outbound phone call. Hey, just checking in on those inspections you had said this morning. Are we any closer? Well, no, I don't have that yet. Okay, when do you think you'll have that? Right? Continue to be the person who sets the calendar in motion, and be mindful of you setting the expectation of when things will be completed. There is nothing that drives me crazier, regardless of which side you represent, when people say to me, you know, Rick, I don't know what to do. It's been 4 days since I heard back from so-and-so. Like, okay, well, so what does that mean? Well, we had a conversation on Monday and she said she'd get back to me. I haven't heard from her. Like, okay, well, have you called? Have you texted? Have you emailed? Have you driven to the office and sat on the porch? I mean, like, what have you done to try and get an answer here? And sometimes the answer is, well, no, she said she'd get back to me. Like, okay. She lied. So now what are you going to do? Right? You still have a responsibility. And my concern about that is not that the agent themselves are frustrated. It's that there's a client who's not getting the information the client is looking for because of the inactivity or the inaction of the agent. So just as a rule of thumb, 24 hours to get an answer from somebody on most things is a reasonable expectation. More than that, in my opinion, starts to become unreasonable unless there's more communication about why we don't have an answer yet. And so when you're setting the schedule as the listing agent, use that as a guideline, right? Impart to the other agent on the other side that expectation. Well, we're going to need some time to get that done. Excellent. So do you think you can get that done within the next 24 hours? How can I assist in getting that done in the next 24 hours? Because if you write nothing else down, and those of you who have ever closed a transaction know what I'm about to say is 110% the truth. Time is no one's friend in a transaction. Time is no one's friend. That's when things skid off the runway, slide through the cracks, people change their mind, something else happens, something else comes on, all right? Interest rates change, some world event happens, right? Time is no one's friend. I am certain that there are transactions that had every agent in the transaction recognized that time was no one's friend and moved more swiftly and set more realistic deadlines, that transactions that fell apart a month ago wouldn't have fallen apart because they would have already been in contract and people would have had less opportunity to freak out and pull the plug. But we allow time to creep in thinking that it's okay, and thinking that we don't want to be pushy, right? You get paid to be aggressive in terms of schedule management. That's
Yeah.
what you get paid to do as a listing agent. You get paid to aggressively schedule manage everybody.
Rick.
That was actually kind of well said. Someone should write that down because I like that. Right?
Yeah.
You get paid to aggressively schedule manage. Yes, Jacqueline.
Rick, I was just going to say, don't expect people to communicate the way you do, the way we do, because of Keller Williams. I mean, everybody's taught to, communicate, but on the outside, it's really not like that. And I've had experiences where I'm sitting there waiting for these people to communicate to someone, whether it's the seller, buyer, whoever it is, that what I've told them, and or they're sitting on it, and you're like, oh my God, why didn't you freaking call them and tell them this?
Yep.
And I don't know why they're waiting for it, but if you don't nudge them, they're, oh, I have, my mother, my this, my that, whatever. Especially now, it's like, oh yeah, I'm,
Yep.
And it's like, you know what? Here, my client, this is serious. My clients are waiting for this. So if you wouldn't mind pushing this forward, that would be great. You kind of really have to give them a direction. There's some people that just need a direction. And
Yep.
if you want them to go that way, you need to push them that way. And don't hesitate to give them a language to give to their people, because they don't know how to say it. And it's
So
not
we
of any
started-
fault of their own, right? It's maybe they just don't know how to do it.
So we started this conversation a little more than an hour ago with that exact word, right? Being directive. And so let's end there because we are out of time. And so the idea of continuing to be directive to help people. And I appreciate what Jacqueline said is that, we tend to speak maybe differently on the inside, except as the broker of 475 of you, here's what I can tell you. It's not just on the outside, right? And so it is on the inside as well. And people continue to need help in clearer, more direct, objective communication. It is a struggle point for a lot of people, and it's because it's a skill, right? Most people don't know how to do that naturally. It is a skill that you have to continue to build, right? And if you are blessed with that kind of communication naturally, you are in the minority. And so let's end on that, because there is a point I want to make about being a listing agent. And being a listing agent doesn't mean that you treat buyer's agents from outside of our organization differently than you treat our own. Because I will tell you that our own that's not a comment about our own agents. You need to not relax on those standards just because it's somebody else inside of the office, right? And I see that happen a lot, and it's a mistake. First of all, it could be depending on how relaxed you get, it could be a violation of your duties to the seller, right? Best case scenario, you just open everybody up for casualness. And again, casualness creates more time, and time is nobody's friend. So know that the standards you set in your business as a listing agent, they apply to everybody. Everybody. I'll tell you a quick story and we'll be done. I can remember when I was at Century 21, I was probably there for 6 or 7 months, and one of the agents there made an announcement at a meeting saying she had this listing that we could go and show. And I thought, oh, that sounds like something I actually have buyers for. And so I asked her for information about it. She gave me the information about it. I went and I showed the property. The people loved it. I came back and I said, hey, I forgot to ask a couple of questions. I shouldn't have forgotten to ask these questions, but I forgot to ask a couple of questions before I left. A, what's this? B, what's that? And C, what's the commission you're paying? Because it wasn't on the MLS, right? So there was no whatever. And she said, oh, you know what? We haven't really worked that out yet. And I said, I'm sorry, but what do you mean you haven't worked? What's the commission on the listing agreement? And she said, oh, I don't have a listing agreement yet. And I said, so you're going to tell me that you just allowed me to waste my time and the time of these buyers, and just PS, I brought them to a house where the sellers were home, which means now we've introduced a buyer and a seller where there's no listing agreement, which means they can cut us out without any second thought. Why on earth would you do that? Well, she started to cry, and then I felt bad, but not bad enough to push to get an answer. It's like, that is not the way we treat each other, right? And so again, just because it's somebody else in the office, have a standard around how you run things and don't deviate from that standard. It's massively important. You have a responsibility to clients on that side, right? All right, guys.
Rick, I'm going to say something to you, and it's a testament to you. Can I just say that? Because I was speaking to an agent today, and I said I needed to get my broker's opinion on something that was, and you know what it is, we were talking about today. And they said, oh, well, you know, and I don't know, it wasn't in a jokingly kind of way, but it was like, you know, they knew you, and they wanted to know, you know, your opinion on what the outcome was going to be, because they didn't know, their broker didn't know, their owner didn't know. And I said, well, let me get with Rick. And because they asked me, they said, wait a minute, who's the broker for your office? And I said, Rick Scott. Oh, I've heard of him. So, and, yeah. And when I brought it back to them, they said, oh, okay. And we went by whatever you said, because their broker didn't have an answer. Their owner didn't have an answer. You know, and I said, listen, this is what Rick had, you know, told me. And basically they took it. You know what I mean? It's like, they don't know. So it's whoever has the leadership really does lead the conversation. You know, honestly.
And that's
true.
Let's end on that, because that is the standard that I want each of you to foster inside of your businesses, right? Because in that scenario, the transparently, I didn't know the answer either. I know where to go and find resources to help me figure out the answer, right? And so that when Jacqueline asked the question last night, I took the time to make sure last night and this morning I found resources that could help me answer that question more specifically, right? And so you need to have those same skills, right? Be the resource. And if you don't know the answer, know where to find resources. I'm happy to be one of those resources for you, right? Your ALC members are happy to be resources for you. Your team leaders are happy to, your leadership team, right? Use those resources that you have available to you, because that's what sets us apart, right? The fact that I knew where to find the question clearly set me apart in that scenario, but it really had nothing to do with me. It had to do with people I went to
quiet down, right? Quiet down. Yes, it did.
Guys, have an awesome weekend. I appreciate you and your time. Have a fun, safe weekend. We'll see you back on Monday.
Thanks, Rick.
Bye.